everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my March wrap up. In March, I DNF'd 2 books and I finished 4 books. And in terms of like how much I liked the books, it wasn't necessarily a very successful month, but it was fairly successful in terms of getting books off of my TBR from my TBR clear out project. If you have not seen the video or heard me talking about it, I will link the original video in the description, but essentially at the beginning of the year, I set up a TBR of books that are the books that have been on my shelf the longest, and this year, one way or another, I want to get those books off of my shelf. Of the books that came off my TBR clear out project, 2 of them are books that I finished reading, and one was a DNF, one was an unhaul. So the 2 books that I finished reading, first is The Beast Warrior by Naoko Uhashi, and I'll talk more about this in a minute, and then also Moon Dark Smile by Tessa Gratton, although this was technically part of my like bonus books, because I had a list of books that are like the ones that I have to get to that are the oldest on my shelf, and then I had a few bonus books that are not as old but are books that I just have not been getting to and I feel like have the highest likelihood of kind of staying on my shelf for a long time, so I'm preemptively kind of including them in this. Anyways, this was one of the bonus books. Then my DNF was Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, and my unhaul was The One Kingdom by Sean Russell. So let's get into it. We'll start with my DNF of Pillars of the Earth because I think this is going to probably be the most controversial one. I got pretty far into this book. I gave this a really good try, honestly. My copy is almost 1,000 pages. I got this far in. I read this much. I got about 600 pages into it, so almost 2/3 of the way into this book. I read the first 3 parts of it because it's split into like parts and then chapters, and then there are like sub chapters. So I read part 1, 2, and 3. And this just didn't work for me in so many ways. I truly could talk about this book for a very long time. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I will try to keep myself as brief as possible, but just know there's a lot more thoughts and opinions that I have. But we'll start kind of broad with like the writing and narrative style, which those kind of were not to my taste, right? The writing style is not one that I particularly enjoy. I think the writing felt fairly plain. It felt very like perfunctory. It was just sort of there. And that is just not my taste in writing. I tend to go for more lyrical or descriptive writing. So that's just a, personal taste. I did switch back and forth between physically reading the book and listening to the audiobook because very often if there are books where like I'm interested in the plot but maybe the writing isn't to my taste, the audiobook will work better for me because I'm not physically reading it. However, I'm able to physically read faster than listen to an audiobook. So I would kind of switch back and forth depending on like how I was feeling. The narrative structure, there are a couple things about this that I think were also not really my taste. One is that I felt like the story skips over large pieces of time and things that I feel like are important to character development, but maybe not as important to the plot of like building this cathedral. Also, if I didn't introduce what this book is about, it's historical fiction set in medieval England in a fictional town called Kingsbridge, and it is about this like huge effort to build a cathedral in Kingsbridge, and we're following multiple perspectives of different people who are involved in building this cathedral and the ways that it impacts their lives and that their lives are being intertwined. There's sort of 3 main groups of characters that we're following in this. But I think that you know, this does cover a huge amount of time, and so it does, because it takes so many years to build a cathedral. So in that way I understand why it would skip over some things and like skip through time, or have time jumps. That's the phrase I was looking for. But it skipped things that I think were important to me, and I think were important to the character development. I think it was much more interested in, you know, moving the plot forward, in, you know, building this cathedral and telling you about the different kind of political machinations and events that went into it, and less interested in spending time with the characters and building their character development and letting you see those like small moments and spend time with them to like build that change over time, which I'm a very character driven reader, and so that's really what I read for. So that's just something that isn't going to work as well for me. Something else that I found frustrating in the way that the author tells the story is that I think it feels like the author has a real distrust in the reader and the reader's like reading comprehension. And I think this came out in a few different ways for me. Like, one is somewhat the writing style, that it is very straightforwardly telling you like, this happened, then this happened, this person felt this way, and really just laying out for you how each person feels, instead of having a more like descriptive way of letting you into their experience. So essentially I'm saying it was very telling, not showing, especially around character emotions, which is just something that I don't particularly like. There are also some points, especially at the beginning, I think it petered off a little bit as it went on, but particularly towards the beginning, there was some very like heavy-handed foreshadowing in that style, where it would start like a chapter or sub-chapter saying like, these characters made this decision and they were going to regret it. And then you read the chapter and like find out why they regret it. And so it's very clearly setting up for you like not just what's going to happen, but how the characters are going to feel and how you're supposed to feel about these events, instead of allowing the reader to just observe the events and deduce like, wow, I bet these characters regret making this decision. And then there also, again, this is particularly towards the beginning, but it just sort of like set up the book to have like a bad taste in my mouth, where it really would like, there were a couple times where something would happen that was very clearly a direct result of something else that had happened maybe one or two like sub chapters ago, like probably less than 20 pages ago. And yet when this thing happened, the author would really like stop everything to explain to the reader, to be like, okay, so you know that like this happened because of this other thing that happened like 20 pages ago. Are you connecting the dots? And again, maybe that works for some people. For me, I find that very frustrating, because again, it just feels like a real lack of trust in the reader and like my reading comprehension, that I'm like, you think that one, I can't remember what happened 20 pages ago, and two, that I can't put like the most obvious of dots together. Anyways, so I think that his writing and his narrative style just really were not like working for me, and you know, he's much more of a plot focus than a character focus, and it just like it just wasn't hitting right for me. That being said, I also had a lot more issues with like the characters themselves. I found the characters overall to be very two-dimensional and bland. They felt very like, just very flat, very basic. There wasn't a lot of like depth or nuance to these characters, and so they were really not that interesting. Personally, I don't have to have characters don't have to be likable in order for me to like a book. as long as they are interesting. It's like you have to at least be either likable or interesting, but these characters were neither. And so I just found them really, it was really hard to engage and like care about anything that they were doing. The only character that I found remotely interesting was Aliana. She was the only character that I really felt had any like hint of being an interesting character, and yet I think she also had some of the least amount of page time of the main characters that we are following. I also had some issues with the way that her character was handled in the story. She does go through a lot of stuff and suffers a lot, and I'm sure, like, you know, I didn't even finish the book. I know that I read a synopsis of the plot. She goes through even more as the story goes on. One of the things, if you are interested in reading this book, I'd say definitely look up content warnings if that is something that you, you know, if that's something that you want. There is quite a lot of violence and particularly sexual assault within this book, and that is part of Aliana's story as well. And I will preface what I'm going to say next with just a little bit of context about me as a reader. I personally am not somebody who says that like sexual assault should never be in a book. I don't think that, you know, books should never include you know, very like heavy or sensitive or disturbing topics. But I think that if you are going to include it, you have to handle it well and have to actually put effort into dealing with these topics. And that, I think, is where my issue with the inclusion of sexual assault throughout the book, but also specifically for Aliana's character, lies. Not in the fact that it is included, but in the fact that I don't feel like it was done well. And I don't think that the author had any real interest in truly engaging with that, with like the subject matter and with the impact that it would have on her character or any of the other characters that this happened to. And so like, if you're not going to truly engage with it, whether because you're not interested or you don't feel like you have the ability to, then just don't include it. Like, I don't think that it's something that should be included just as either shock value or a plot device. And that's what it ended up feeling like because the author didn't truly engage with it. So that was my issue with the way that it was handled. Also, I will say so far as I read into the book, all of the sexual assault scenes are told from the perspective of the perpetrator. And that also, I don't think, is well handled. I don't think that the female characters in this are written particularly well. I think that the way the author writes them depicts them in a very shallow interpretation of being a strong female character, but without, again, any real interest in engaging with developing these characters and the depth of them as individuals. Aliana's character in particular, really, I don't think that she gets enough page time, and the only time that she shows up from, as I said, the like 600 pages that I read, she pretty much only shows up in order to suffer or to be lusted after by the male characters. Even the ones who lust after her in this sort of idealizing way, there is a character who kind of puts her on this like pedestal and treats her or imagines her as like a princess. It is truly his perspective on her is just lusting after her. He doesn't really care about her as an individual person. He is still kind of objectifying her in still maybe a positive way, because he is imagining her in this like hyper positive like princess way, but he has no interest in her as an individual. There is a character in this that is very early on in the book who I saw in another review someone described as like the medieval version of a manic pixie dream girl, which I'm like, that is truly the best way to describe this character. She is, for people who have read it, it's Ellen's character, because her whole character is really there just to be this kind of like spitfire wild child sort of character who is like a sexual fantasy for this other character, who, yeah, is just there to kind of like liven up his life, and be this fantasy for him. And the way that they get together was just the most ridiculous thing that lacks any realism. And as I read that scene, I was like, my eyes are rolling so hard, they're gonna fall right out of my head. Like, oh my God, her scene of how she gets together with him is like so stupid. So I don't think that the female characters are written particularly well or with any real depth or nuance to them. I don't think the author shows any particular interest in that, but I also don't think that he's writing the male characters particularly well. Honestly, I feel like the way the male characters are written is kind of insulting, because most of the male characters in this book are absolute idiots, and many of them are just terrible people. Anyways, I just don't feel like his characterization is very strong. Like, I can also have so much to say about the way he writes his main villain character. The main villain, is one of those characters who is both so stupid and also just a very is such a bad person, but without any nuance. He is such a cardboard cutout, mustache twirling villain that is like, he feels like one of those characters who it just goes like, well, he's a bad person because he's a bad person. Like, that's the whole thing. That's the whole character. Now, the author is successful in creating a truly hateable villain. But again, I think that he uses, one, a very shallow approach and kind of just some really quick shortcuts to creating this really hateable villain. Again, there's no real nuance to him, because some of the easiest, quickest ways to make a reader or just make somebody hate a character is to make that character abuse animals or sexually assault people. And that's pretty much his whole personality. The villain in this, that's his whole personality. And I got to a point where like every time he did something or came back on page, like I wasn't even shocked or appalled or upset about anything he did. It just became exhausting because he was such a dull villain that I just was like, ugh, not him again. Which is not how you want to feel about a villain, you know? Anyways, I have a lot more like thoughts, feelings, opinions. I just like, I guess in that way the book was successful in giving, like, I have a lot to say about this. I could keep going, but I'm gonna just let it go at this point. But it was successful in you know, I had a lot of thoughts and feelings about it, so there's that. But yes, I got about 600 pages of the way into this and I just was like, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot force myself to read this anymore. For the people who do enjoy it, I am glad that you found something to enjoy, but I don't think there was anything I really liked in this book. So that was a DNF. I don't know if you can hear that Merlin is snoring in the background, but he is sleeping right next to me, so enjoy the little dog snoring sounds if you can hear them. Then my unhaul was The One Kingdom by Sean Russell. This is one that I've kind of been waffling on whether I was going to try and read it or just unhaul it. I did see a review from somebody that was talking about how the writing in this is very beautiful, but that the characterization is very flat. And I do love beautiful writing, but I'm very much a characters reader. And so I don't think that this is going to work for me. And I unhauled this right after DNFing Pillars of the Earth in like a fit of like, I can't do this anymore. I'm not reading any books that I'm not like excited about. I just decided to unhaul this. So it was sort of caught in the crossfire there. But now let's get into the books that I actually finished this month. First up, we have The Beast Warrior by Naoko Uehashi. This is the second book to The Beast Player, which I read a few years ago and really enjoyed. This is a series that is originally written in Japanese and has recently been translated into English. The Beast Player, in the first book, we start off following our main character, Ellen, whose mother is a caretaker for the Toda, the royal Toda, which are these sort of like water serpent, kind of like water dragons. I think they have legs, that the like royal military use. But one day, a whole bunch of those Toda die all at once. Her mother is blamed and put to death, and then our main character Ellen, at a very young age, is kind of out on her own. She's found by a kind older man who then raises her, and we're following her through her young life in the first book as she is figuring out what she's going to do with her life, but she kind of in some ways follows in her mother's footsteps because she has this knack with animals. She's deeply observant and has this real understanding of animal behavior. And so that kind of brings her back to the attention of the royal, like the caretakers of royal animals. And that's kind of follows her story. This is then quite a few years later. Ellen is, I think, in her 30s in this book. She is married now. She has a child who's like 8 or 10 at the beginning of the book. And she's kind of started a new life since the events of the first book. But we start this book where she has been called in because, once again, a large amount of Toda have died and they don't know why. And so they've called her in kind of as an inspector to try and figure out what happened, because although this isn't really her job anymore, she does have this special knack for kind of unraveling the mysteries of nature and animal behavior. And so as she is investigating this, she is discovering more and more like secrets and information that has been withheld from people about the care of the Toda and other kind of magical creatures, and that there is this like lost knowledge that was withheld intentionally. And so she's learning more about, or trying to figure out why that is, and then how to take care of these animals. But this is also happening at a time where there's this sort of impending war, and these are animals that are used for war. And so she has to kind of decide how she is going to use this knowledge that she is finding, and is she going to use it in a way that could help prevent or win a war, or in a way that would protect the animals. And this second book, I thought it was okay. Honestly, I really enjoyed the first book. I think it worked really well as a standalone. I don't feel like it needed a sequel. I have seen some articles about this that said that the author actually wrote the first book as a standalone, did not intend to continue the story, but then there was so much so much support from readers and people wanting to know what happened next to this character that she went back and wrote this second book. And I think that she did do a good job of really thinking of like a new story and like, where is this character going? I do think that the story has some interesting elements and like themes around morality and these difficult choices when you're kind of like in an impossible situation, and how do you choose and who do you protect? So in that way, I feel like it was good, but I just feel like as a story, it wasn't necessary. I was happy with that first book. I don't think that the sequel was really necessary. I also, in some ways in this book, found our main character, Ellen, to be more frustrating. And that might be because she was put in some very difficult situations where she had to make some difficult choices, but she also is older and is an adult. And there were some points where she was, you know, discovering this information, and she knew that it was potentially very sensitive information that could have huge implications for different like political and like war related, you know, things going on. And yet she was not really that careful about who she told that information to. And it just was like very frustrating to me, because then it would create these like bad situations that I was like, maybe figure out like what this means before you go and just like tell people randomly, and then they start trying to be like, whoa, how can we use this to win the war? I feel like she was just frustrating me. I also think as like in this one, we get more into like this kind of information that has been intentionally withheld, as we're sort of unraveling some of these mysteries of the history of like taking care of these creatures. But as we learned more about the history, it just felt more and more unbelievable, because so much of just the way that this entire country functions, but particularly the way that they care for these animals, relies so completely on nobody asking any questions. And it just, at a certain point, like there is a certain amount that I will believe people will just kind of go along with things and not ask questions, but it got to a point that felt very unbelievable to me, that I'm like, truly over like hundreds of years, nobody has asked this question before. It just felt more and more unbelievable as we went. Anyways, I don't think I actually gave this one a rating, but I'm glad that I finished it. You know, now I know. And I would, you know, I have reread the first book. I probably would reread it again in the future. I don't think I would reread this second book. All right, then I finished Nightshine by Tessa Gratton. This one, also one that is a second book in a duology. The first book was, oh no, this is Moon Dark Smile. The first book was Nightshine. Nightshine, I enjoyed when I read it, you know, years ago. Moon Dark Smile is the sequel that is following the child of some of the characters from the first book. And so the character that we're following is Raeliel, who is a royal princess, essentially. And in the royal palace, there is a demon who inhabits this palace. But the demon wants to exist outside of this building, you know? And so Raeliel figures out a way to allow the demon to live in her body so that they can go on a quest to figure out how to you know, give this demon freedom, how to give it a way to exist outside of the palace and have its own life. And so that's what we're following, is they kind of are going on this secret mission to find a sorcerer who can help them to I can't think, personify is not the right word. I can't think of the word, but to essentially get like a corporeal body for the demon whose name is Moon. This is kind of similar, I guess, in that I feel like I don't think that I needed the sequel. I really enjoyed Nightshine. I did not enjoy Moon Dark Smile as much. I think that, as always, I enjoy Tessa Gratton's writing. I like her writing style a lot. I also, one of the things that was very interesting about this was the writing in this was very, like the only way I can think to describe it is that it's very sensual. And I don't mean sensual in like a sexual way necessarily. Like sometimes it's a little bit, because it's kind of, you know, it's this YA, you know, self-discovery kind of story. But very often it's just sensual as in like of the senses, because this demon is sharing Raziel's body with her, and it is the first time that the demon has experienced a body, has experienced senses. And so there is a lot about the demon like just in like enjoying that like corporeal physical sensation. And so I did enjoy like the writing itself and the kind of sensual quality to it. I think that the themes, like there are some themes that I did really enjoy about this, about like freedom and justice, and using like, you know, what is just for, you know, this being who like its existence in the palace protects the royal family, but it has no freedom and it doesn't have its own, you know, choice. And so I think those themes I enjoyed. There are some other themes that were similar to the first book, especially regarding like the power of existing in liminal space, because that is where magic comes from in this series. I enjoy the concept and I liked them in the first book, but I feel like in this second one, it was like too heavy-handed and a little like hitting you over the head with it a bit, which I don't love. Like I love a good theme, but I don't love it when it feels like I'm being hit over the head with the theme. But I think overall, like I just didn't find the story of this one as compelling, and I didn't find the characters as engaging. So it was fine. Again, I didn't feel like I needed a sequel to Nightshine. I liked the first one better, but I also, you know, I enjoy Tessa Gratton's writing, so in that way it was just enjoyable to read. Although I read part of it and then I listened to the audiobook for the rest of it. Then I read a nonfiction book, which I haven't read. I haven't finished a nonfiction book in a long time, but I finally finished The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. I actually started this last year, read half of it, put it down, and then I finished the second half in March. But I really enjoy this. This is particularly about the way that the different ways people can react to like external demands or expectations versus internal demands and expectations. It kind of creates this like 2x2 matrix where you get 4 basic types, which you can, does she have? Yeah, here we go. I don't know how well this is because it's very bright yellow. But you get these 4 types, which is the upholder, the questioner, the obliger, and the rebel, which are all like, they kind of, some of them are more comfortable with internal expectations, some are more comfortable with external expectations. And I think it's very interesting. You know, I don't think that this theory is really based on any scientific backing, but as a framework, I did find it very interesting and I enjoyed talking to people about it, which really is what I want out of nonfiction. The nonfiction that I tend to read often falls into the realm of like psychology, pop psychology, sometimes kind of in the self-help realm. But my approach to it is less often that I'm actually looking for self-help and more so that I'm just looking for an interesting idea. I don't particularly need it to be something that gives me like actionable steps to improve my life, because that's not what I'm reading it for. I am reading it because I just like to have a new idea to turn over in my mind. And what I really want out of a nonfiction book like this, something that will make it feel successful to me, is if it gives me like some new ideas to think about, if it gives me some good questions for me to think about, and some good questions that I can kind of start conversations with people around me. And I feel like I got that out of this, so I really enjoyed it. And then the last book that I read in March was Royal Heirs by Sharon Shin. This is the second book in the Elemental Blessings series. And in this one, we're following a character named Josetta, who we met in the first book, but now she was a side character in the first book, but now she got her own story and her own romance. In this one, Josetta meets Rafe, who is a kind of a professional gambler. That's how he spends his days and his nights and how he makes his life. But as they build their romance, he starts to think maybe he should do something more, something bigger with his life. And this book, going into this one, I knew that it may not be as good as the first one. I really enjoyed the first book in this series, Troubled Waters, but from looking at reviews, overall it seems like people love the first one, not so into the second one, but then it seems like reviews and like ratings kind of go up for the rest of the series. So I was kind of like, I'll just read the second one to get through it and then keep going. And I can see why the second book is not as popular as the first one. I did not like it quite as much as the first one. I think that the romance is more central to this one, but I didn't feel as excited about it. I feel like the main characters in this felt much more flat than in the first book. Also, there were a lot of I don't know, there were a lot of like plot conveniences that ended up happening that I can't really explain without spoiling things, but there were some things where I was kind of like, okay, like it gets a little ridiculous. I will say also, like, the Josetta as the main character definitely has a kind of not like other girls vibe. Like, actually there is a point where another character literally says like, you're different from other girls, and she's like, I know, which was also kind of ridiculous. But even so, being the one who's like not like other girls, she's kind of a boring character. I also think there are some things that were not handled very well in this book, one of which is there is a visiting prince from another country who is described as being exotic. He's described, I believe, as, you know, being a person of color. He wears a turban. They repeatedly talk about how stupid they think his turban is, and his country and their you know, their culture are consistently depicted as being like barbaric. So I was like, I don't think that that was well handled in this. There also is a character who shows up very briefly that is probably, from the way that she's described, of course it's in a fantasy world, so they don't use these exact terms, but from the way she's described, it seems like this character is very like high support needs, autistic. But this character is just sort of appears very briefly, and mostly what we focus on is the kind of like the political issues that causes, and how sad everybody around her is, like how sad her mother and like all of the characters and family surrounding her are, that she is, you know, very high support needs, autistic. And so, I don't know, I didn't really love the way that that was depicted either. So, you know, between like, I don't feel like this handled some things particularly well, and then also just that like the plot had some kind of ridiculous conveniences to it. I felt like the main characters were kind of flat. This one just was not as good as the first book. I am hoping that the second book will, or not the second book, the third book will improve. I'm gonna continue on and kind of see how it goes, and see if I'm going to continue with the, you know, fourth and fifth book, because there are 5. I think there actually is going to be a 6th book this year. Anyways, I already have the 3rd book, so I'm gonna read that one and see if it improves. So those are all of the books that I read in March. I would love to know if you have read any of these, if you are planning to read any of them. How was your March reading? But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye.